In my past life, I drove Judas to jump into the sea and commit suicide. After his death, I became the most evil woman in the world. They all said that it was my overbearing nature that forced my husband to his death. I thought so too. So for 10 years, I worked my ass off to earn money, support my mother-in-law, and provide for my son. Even when my mother-in-law either beat or scolded me, and my son repeatedly wished I were dead, I never retorted. I thought this was the sin I had to atone for. Until I was terminally ill, lying on the hospital bed waiting to die. My dead husband showed up in front of me with his wife and children. He told me, "I'm sorry, Scarlett. I faked my death by jumping into the sea back then to seek true love. I didn't expect you to suffer so much." He looked at me with guilt in his eyes, while behind him stood his wife and children. While I was suffering from illness, he was living a happy life with his wife, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. "Give me back my son." Judas's mother pounced on me, tearing and hitting me, wishing she could strangle me on the spot. The people who came to pay their respects watched this scene coldly, and no one stopped her. Everyone was pitying her. At her age, she had lost her son, and it was supposedly because her daughter-in-law had driven him to his death. Maybe she was fooling around with someone else and drove Judas to his death with anger. Judas was such a good kid. What a pity that he was ruined by this wicked woman. Judas's mother slapped me across the face. I snapped back to reality, suddenly stood up, pushed Judas's mother away, and rushed to the coffin like a madwoman, trying to open the lid. "I want to open the coffin." "Are you crazy?" Judas's mother quickly came to her senses and rushed over to push me down. "He's my man. I want to see him one last time." I stared at Judas's mother and said word by word. In my past life, in the 10th year of my marriage to Judas, he had an affair with the new young secretary in the company. After I found out, before I could even propose a divorce, Judas left a suicide note and jumped into the sea. I was left alone, at a loss, staring at that suicide note that was blaming me. I thought I had driven him to his death. After Judas's death, I took on the responsibility of supporting the family alone, taking care of my mother-in-law, looking after my son, and then endured their resentful looks and curses day after day, year after year, until my son was admitted to university with a bright future, and Judas's mother was wearing gold and silver, spending my hard-earned money. Until I was penniless, lingering on the hospital bed. The patient in the adjacent bed pointed at me and said I was pitiful, and then warned her daughter, "Look, if you don't have children, this is what will happen to you when you're old." I twitched the corners of my mouth, wanting to tell her that actually, I did have a son. It's just that since Judas's death, he had never called me mom again, even though I had supported him for 10 years and worked hard to pay for his tuition. But it didn't matter. I didn't blame him. It was my fault. Before Judas showed up with his beautiful wife and young children, I had already resigned myself to my fate. But unfortunately, when I was sick and dying, Judas showed up with his wife and children, looking glamorous. He knelt by my bedside, crying his eyes out, and revealed the truth of that year. Back then, Delilah and I were truly in love. But I was already married to you. I really had no choice. I couldn't abandon my wife and children, but I was living a hellish life without Delilah. I was in so much pain that I could only choose to fake my death and escape. So he faked his suicide, left a suicide note blaming me for being overbearing, and then eloped with his mistress to live a happy life? What was I then? What were the 10 years I spent being cursed by everyone and enduring everyone's cold stares? I really wanted to ask him, but my parched throat couldn't utter a single word, only making a sound like a broken bellows. My life was slipping away. The last scene before I closed my eyes was my own son Ryan comforting him, "Dad, don't be sad. It's enough that Mom saw you come back alive before she died. She must be very pleased." No, I wasn't pleased at all. I only wished I could turn into a vengeful ghost and drag their whole family to hell. I died with a heart full of resentment. When I opened my eyes again, I was reborn 10 years ago, the day after Judas faked his death by jumping into the sea. According to the customs in Judas's hometown, a person's body should be placed in the mourning hall for 3 days after death before being buried. But in my past life, Judas's coffin was buried in a hurry after only half a day. Given how much Judas's mother doted on her son, how could she bear to hold such a hasty funeral for him? Now that I think about it, in my past life, from the time Judas jumped into the river to commit suicide until he was buried, I never actually saw Judas's body with my own eyes. There must be something wrong with this coffin. I stared intently at Judas's mother. Sure enough, I saw a fleeting look of panic on her face. Judas doesn't want to see you. He's already been driven to his death by you. What's the use of regretting now? As she said this, she started crying again. If you hadn't been so overbearing, how could Judas have abandoned me? I heard a lot of such words in my past life. At first, I thought she was sad about her son's death. Later, I realized that she was blaming me for not being able to keep her son, which made her unable to see him. Judas faked his death and eloped with his mistress to get rid of me, but wasn't he also abandoning her? My muddled mind cleared up. I twitched the corners of my mouth and scanned the hostile crowd around me. The people who came to pay their respects were all Judas's relatives. With so many of them, it was definitely not possible for me to force open the coffin. I didn't insist anymore. I turned around and silently dialed a phone number. Hello, is this the police? I want to report a crime. I suspect someone deliberately murdered my husband. Because I firmly claimed it was murder, the police arrived quickly. When the siren sounded, Judas's mother clearly panicked. Who reported the case? It's me. I walked out of the crowd and pointed directly at the coffin in the morning hall. Police officers, I suspect that my husband didn't commit suicide at all. Instead, someone killed him and then disguised it as a suicide by jumping into the sea. I demand an autopsy by opening the coffin. As soon as I said that, Judas's mother immediately panicked. No. I don't agree. She pointed at me and cursed, Scarlet. How could you be so evil? You drove my son to his death. Do you want him to have no peace even after death? As she said this, she took out the suicide note that had once nailed me to the pillar of shame. Police officers, don't listen to her nonsense. My son was driven to suicide by her. This is the suicide note he left. The police opened the piece of paper. I was a bit far away, but I could still vaguely see a passage. After getting married, she became vulgar, ignorant, and petty. Every moment spent with her made me feel suffocated. I had known about Judas's shamelessness long ago, but at this moment, I still couldn't help feeling a chill in my heart. Judas and I were college sweethearts. We were together for 4 years and got married right after graduation. I was an orphan back then with no relatives here. At first, Judas's mother didn't agree to this marriage, but Judas was determined to be with me. After marriage, we worked hard all the way. From being penniless at the beginning, we later bought our first house and had our own little home. However, as our son was born and life gradually stabilized, he began to dislike and avoid me, either intentionally or unintentionally. He disliked and avoided my no longer youthful appearance and that I only knew about daily necessities and couldn't accompany him in romantic pursuits anymore. Later, he had an affair with Delilah, the new secretary in the company. After I found out, I asked for a divorce, but he didn't want to bear the reputation of being an adulterer. So he chose to commit suicide by jumping into the sea and pushed all the blame onto me. And he faked his death to get away, leaving his parents and children at home without having to take care of them, so that he could continue to be affectionate with his mistress. Recalling the painful 10 years in my past life, waves of hatred welled up in my heart. This time, I would never let Judas have his way. Judas died in such an unclear way. As his mother, shouldn't you be more eager to seek the truth for your son? It's just opening the coffin. What are you afraid of? Or is there something wrong with this coffin in the first place? Under my series of pressing questions, Judas's mother was left speechless. She stammered and couldn't say a word for a long time, and then simply played dirty. I don't care. Anyway, it just can't be opened. Whoever wants to open the coffin will have to step over my dead body. Judas's mother stood firmly in front of the coffin. It was useless. I firmly insisted that Judas was murdered. Today, This coffin has to be opened, whether they like it or not. Seeing that she couldn't stop it, Judas's mother was so angry that she cursed loudly. Scarlett, if you dare to open the coffin, I'll make my son divorce you. Your son is already dead. How can he divorce me? I sneered and ignored her. As the coffin was opened, Judas's mother's cursing stopped abruptly. There was nothing inside the coffin. Where was the body? There were only a few big stones inside the coffin. In the silence of the room, I was the only one left pointing at the coffin filled with stones, crying and laughing at the same time. How absurd. It was clearly Judas who had an affair first. It was clearly his fault. But he and Judas's mother used the fake death to put all the blame on me. They ruined me. I want to file a case. My husband is missing. I want to file a case. Judas's mother still wanted to make a fuss. A blinding flash of light lit up, taking pictures of the empty coffin. I wiped away my tears. Just in case, after calling the police, I specifically invited the local journalists. I had even come up with the title for them, which was The Disappearing Husband. After filing a case at the police station, I received a call from the newspaper office. The journalist on the other end of the phone sounded excited. It turned out that once the story of Judas's disappearance was reported, it quickly attracted a lot of attention because it was so strange. The newspaper office specially invited me to do another interview. To find Judas as soon as possible, of course I gladly agreed. I was crying beautifully in front of the camera. Husband, although you had an affair with a mistress, I don't mind. Mom is old and our son is still so young. Come back quickly. Mistress? The journalist Keen Ly noticed something was wrong. Facing the journalist's inquiries, I stammered. Finally, I broke down and cried out the truth. My husband isn't dead at all. It was my mother-in-law who privately held a funeral and announced his death. He isn't dead at all. He eloped with a mistress. The journalist's eyes lit up upon hearing this. He wanted to ask more, but I refused to say anything more. Because of my statement, the disappearance of the body became even more mysterious, and many people spontaneously paid attention to this matter. With the help of numerous netizens, within half a day, someone discovered Judas's whereabouts. Someone accidentally took a picture of Judas once appearing in the neighboring coastal city, with a young woman by his side. The two were kissing passionately by the sea, under the setting sun. The sunset elongated their figures. Such beautiful and romantic pictures were uploaded immediately, causing a huge uproar. Didn't they say this person was missing? Does this look like being missing? Isn't he married? This woman isn't his wife. What's going on? Could it be that he came back to life? Is it a script? Is it deliberately for attracting traffic? Many skeptical remarks came pouring in. At this crucial moment of traffic, I decisively registered a live broadcast account and started live broadcasting my journey to find my husband by taking advantage of this wave of traffic. The name of the live broadcast room was The Missing Man. When I found Judas in the neighboring city with a camera, he was having an intimate moment with Delilah in a hotel. Listening to the sounds coming from inside the room, I silently glanced at the bright sun outside the window and decisively knocked on the door. Factually, I wanted to barge in directly. But thinking that in case there were some inappropriate scenes that might lead to the live broadcast being banned, I still chose to knock. Husband? Husband? I finally found you. Husband, come out quickly. The sounds inside the room stopped abruptly, followed by the man's incredulous voice. Scarlett? The sound of people hurriedly putting on clothes could be heard inside the room, and then the door opened, and Judas's face appeared in front of me. How could you be here? I've already faked my death to get away. What on earth do you want? Can you stop pestering me? Judas's face was full of annoyance. He suddenly paused when he saw the mobile phone in my hand. I gave him a smile and silently mouthed a sentence. Sorry, the live broadcast is on. Judas was a bit confused. He had been so preoccupied with being affectionate with Delilah these days that he hadn't looked at his phone, so he hadn't noticed the public opinion that had already erupted on the internet. So I kindly reminded him to check the hot search. By the time Judas finished looking at his phone and his face changed drastically, I had already held up my phone to look around the room and then asked in a spooky voice. Husband, didn't you jump into the sea? Mom even held a funeral for you. Judas was angry, Judas was annoyed, and Judas forced a smile in front of the camera. Scarlett, I was just joking with you. You're really too overbearing. I just wanted to hide away and have some peace for a few days. Really? I gave a half smile and casually pulled out Delilah, who was hiding behind the curtain. Then was having an affair with a mistress also for hiding away and having peace. As our eyes met, Judas's face flushed bright red. He looked at Delilah and then at the tens of thousands of viewers in my live broadcast room. Delilah and I are just colleagues. Can you stop being so suspicious about everything? Do colleagues sleep in the same bed? I interrupted him and shook the red lingerie I had just picked up from the bed. Judas was momentarily choked up and still wanted to make excuses, but he just couldn't come up with any more lies. Finally, he gritted his teeth. Scarlett, I'm sorry. You're too overbearing. I felt so suppressed being with you that I lost my head for a moment. I just made a mistake that all men make. Please forgive me. Such a typical statement. How shameless. So I nodded. Of course I forgive you. Mom is old and our son is still so young. The family can't do without you. And I love you so much. I definitely forgive you. As my words fell, Judas let out a sigh of relief. However, Delilah, who had been keeping her eyes downcast and standing aside all this time, spoke up. Brother Judas, I'm pregnant with your child. You can't abandon me. Without another word, Delilah immediately knelt down on the spot, hugging my legs and crying pitifully. Sister, I'm pregnant. Please, for the sake of the child, don't take Brother Judas away from me. I only have him, the child can't grow up without a father. Sister, please, I'm begging you. After she finished speaking, Judas beside her was stunned. Delilah, you're pregnant? He looked at Delilah's stomach in disbelief, and then was ecstatic. Delilah. I'm finally going to be a father. Delilah leaned against his arms and nodded weakly. Then she looked at me timidly. Sister, I really like Brother Judas. Looking at the weak and pitiful woman in his arms, Judas seemed to have made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and said, Scarlett, Delilah and I are truly in love. You. Please let us be together. You. Don't you want me anymore? I covered my mouth, letting out a tear of disbelief. The live broadcast ended abruptly here. After turning off the live broadcast, I looked at the woman kneeling on the ground with an expressionless face. She was indeed very beautiful, with a small face on the verge of crying, just the type that Judas liked the most. In a trance, I remembered the first time I saw her in my past life. At that time, I was lying on the hospital bed, looking haggard, while she was wearing the latest dress, holding Judas's arm, and standing so prettily in front of my hospital bed. Young and beautiful, although about the same age as me, we seemed to be from two different worlds. Later I found out that her youth and beauty were all at the expense of my hard work. All the money I had earned by working so hard for 10 years had gone into the wallets of Judas and Delilah without my knowledge. To prevent me from noticing, Judas's mother had specifically transferred all the money to Delilah's account. Scarlett, I'm sorry. Let's get divorced. Divorce? Don't even think about it. I snapped back to reality and decisively shook my head to refuse. I was reborn not to get divorced from him. I was going to drag his whole family to hell. I won't get divorced until Judas is completely disgraced. Judas was anxious. Delilah loves me so much. She's pregnant with my child now. She can't live without me. I have to take care of her. I can take care of her with you. I interrupted him. I can get along with her peacefully. For your sake, I'm willing to. She loves you so much. I guess she'll be willing too. I glanced at Delilah, who was still kneeling on the ground. She was looking at me in astonishment. Of course Delilah wasn't willing. She had originally planned to pretend to be weak to force Judas to divorce me. How could she have expected that I would be so stupid and cowardly? The mistress of my cheating husband was pregnant. As the legal wife, I was actually going to take care of the mistress. Delilah was furious, but because of her weak persona, she couldn't show it and could only hold her neck and remain silent. Coincidentally, Judas was still praising me for being magnanimous with a happy face. Judas's mother, who had followed me here, was also beaming with joy. She quickly rushed over to help Delilah up. "You're pregnant. Get up quickly." Then she scolded me with dissatisfaction. "Delilah is pregnant. You always make her kneel. What if something happens to the child?" "Exactly. You've always been unwilling to have a second child. Now that Delilah is having one, you don't need to have another one either." Judas's mother had always thought that I had only given Judas one son and had let down their Judas family. After I refused to have a second child when she urged me to in the past, she had always disliked me. According to Judas's mother's idea, I should have given birth to 10 or 8 children to make their Judas family prosperous. "Mom, Aunt Delilah is young and beautiful. It's normal for Dad to like her. Don't make things difficult for Aunt Delilah." I snapped back to reality and looked at my own son who was standing in front of Delilah. For a moment, I couldn't help but find it a bit funny. Aunt Delilah? So, I was the only one who had been kept in the dark. I twitched the corners of my mouth. "Okay, I won't make things difficult for your Aunt Delilah. After all, the child is the most important thing." I looked at Delilah's stomach with a gentle smile. Under the pretext of caring about the child's health, I dragged Delilah to the hospital to have several examinations such as a fetal checkup. Delilah was originally unwilling, but she couldn't resist the repeated mentions of doing it for the child. Judas and his mother were very satisfied with my docility. Judas's mother even praised me for the first time in a long while. "As a woman, you should be more magnanimous. She's carrying Judas's own son in her belly. Don't worry. Mom is still on your side. When she gives birth to the child, we'll bring it home for you to raise. You're the legal wife. She won't threaten your position." Look at what she said. One might think that their Judas family was some high and mighty one. But in fact, Judas was just a small department manager. Regarding this, I casually agreed while looking at the fetal examination report. Delilah was indeed pregnant. So, on a late night 3 days later, I left a rather ambiguous suicide note and then turned around and got on a plane to go abroad. Isn't it just faking death? If Judas could do it, so could I. The husband had an affair and even brought the pregnant mistress back home, asking the legal wife to take good care of her. The legal wife was so heartbroken that she couldn't bear it and wanted to commit suicide. It's quite reasonable, isn't it? In my past life, Judas faked his death to get away and then left his parents and child to me, running off alone to be affectionate with the mistress. He had made me suffer for half my life. Now that I was reborn, it was his turn to taste the feeling of being unable to express his bitterness. The next morning after I left, Judas's family was in chaos. First, it was breakfast. Judas had to go to work and Ryan had to go to school. They had long been used to me preparing the meals in advance and waiting for them. Now, looking at the empty kitchen, both of them were extremely angry. Where on earth did Scarlett go fooling around in the morning? She didn't even cook breakfast, mop the floor, or wash the clothes I changed yesterday. Is she even a woman? Why is Mom so lazy? She still hasn't cooked at this hour. What if I'm late for school because of this? Unable to find me, Judas and his son could only vent their anger on Judas's mother. "Quickly cook for us. Otherwise, I'll have my salary deducted if I'm late for work." Judas's mother hurriedly made breakfast for her grandson and son. Not only did she get a scolding, but they also complained that the food didn't taste good. Judas's mother had never been treated like this before. She immediately started cursing and called me. When she couldn't get through, she sent a flurry of text messages. Insults like "bitch" and "fooling around" were all screenshot by me and posted online together with Delilah's fetal examination report. At the same time, I added the caption, "Perhaps I'm the one who's redundant. Goodbye, this world." After doing all this, I turned off my phone. The chaos in Judas's family had nothing to do with me for the time being. Now what I should consider is that I left in such a hurry that I didn't bring any luggage. When I get off the plane, I'll have to do some serious shopping for some clothes. Looking at the floating clouds outside the plane window, I couldn't help but feel a bit excited. I ate, drank, and had fun abroad for half a month. When I was done having fun, I returned to China and settled in a small town with beautiful scenery. I spent half a year living a peaceful and self-cultivating life. Compared to my comfortable life here, Judas's family had been in a chaotic state for the past 6 months. First of all, the suicide note I posted online before leaving caused a stir because the content was dramatic enough. Coupled with the fact that many people were already concerned about this matter, it quickly became a big issue. For a while, the hashtags about the cheating man and the mistress driving the legal wife to death were everywhere. The two main characters, Judas and Delilah, were quickly exposed. Although Judas quickly called the police and learned that I was still alive, many people in the live broadcast room that day saw that Judas's affair was a fact. Even if Judas posted an explanation online, no one believed him. Faced with such huge social public opinion pressure, Judas quickly lost his job. Some people even went to block him at the entrance of the community, scaring the whole family so much that they didn't dare to go out. Even Ryan was affected at school. Students of the same grade looked at him strangely and asked him, "Was your mother really driven to death by the mistress?" Wherever he went, people pointed fingers at him. After a long time, Ryan didn't want to go to school anymore. The three of them, the grandmother, the father, and the son, hid at home all day long, not daring to go out. Since Judas's family was having a hard time, Delilah naturally wasn't doing any better. After her affair was exposed, the company directly fired her. Her family thought she was a disgrace and drove her out. Helplessly, she could only move into Judas's house with her almost 8-month pregnant belly. Judas's mother was mean. No matter how calculating Delilah was, she couldn't avoid being wronged. I wonder if she ever regretted being Judas's mistress when she had nightmares at night. I sighed. In the past 6 months, Judas had called me hundreds of times using different numbers. At first, he cursed me in various ways, asking me to delete the videos online. Otherwise, he threatened to divorce me or not let me see Ryan. I ignored all of them. I didn't answer the calls and didn't reply to the messages. Judas was furious but had no way to deal with me. He wanted to come and find me, but I made sure to be nowhere to be found. Later, when Judas really had no other options, he started to show his misery in different ways. He was indeed miserable. He had to take care of his 6-year-old son, his pregnant lover, and his elderly mother. He was so busy all day long. What's more, at this critical moment, he also had to look for a job everywhere. However, after sending out so many resumes, no company dared to hire him. Judas had been living a miserable life in the past 6 months. Just like I did in my past life. Counting the days, Delilah was about to give birth soon. It was time for me to go back and face that bunch of superb in Judas's family. Early the next morning, I carried the latest designer bag and knocked on the door of Judas's house. It was Ryan, my own son, who opened the door for me. "Is it Mom?" He had changed a lot in the past 6 months. There was a hint of timidity in his eyes. After seeing me nod, Ryan's eyes suddenly turned red. "Mom, you're finally back." Looking at the obviously short old clothes he was wearing, the corners of my mouth curled up into a smile. "During the time I was away, Aunt Delilah must have taken good care of you, right? Look, you've grown so tall. No wonder you like Aunt Delilah. If I were you, I'd like her too." I patted him on the shoulder, ignored the hesitation on his face, and walked straight past him into the house. As soon as I entered the house, even though I had expected it, I couldn't help but be a bit dumbfounded. Although I knew that Judas's family had been having a hard time recently, it was almost like a pigsty in here. There were piles of instant noodle cups and Coke cans everywhere, and flies were buzzing around. Anyone who didn't know would think this was a garbage dump. "Sister, you're finally back." I turned around and saw Delilah with a big pregnant belly. She had moved in to live with Judas after I left. She had changed a lot in the past 6 months. She looked much older. There were a few more wrinkles on her once fair and tender face. At this moment, she stared at me with wide eyes, pretending to be surprised. Sister, you disappeared suddenly half a year ago, which worried us for a long time. Brother Judas even lost his job because of the online abuse. But I know you didn't do it on purpose. With her instigating like this, Judas behind her immediately got angry and his eyes turned red. Bitch! You've made me suffer so much. I'll kill you. Judas roared and wanted to rush over to hit me. But after taking just a couple of steps, he slipped on a watermelon rind and fell right in front of me. Just right, he kowtowed to me. I sighed. Husband, it's not a festival or any special occasion. You don't need to perform such a grand gesture. I took out 20 yuan from my bag and threw it in front of him. Before he could get angry again, I quickly added. Actually, I've made a lot of money abroad in the past 6 months. I'm back this time to take you and our son to live a good life and enjoy the good fortune. I was lying to him. Actually, I didn't have a single penny left in my pocket. But Judas believed it. He stared at my designer clothes with shining eyes and unconsciously swallowed. He didn't look as shrewd as before. The past 6 months seemed to have worn down all his ambitions. So much so that many of the plans I had prepared were useless. I just casually fooled him a few words and he believed that I had made a lot of money from investments abroad. As for Delilah, she was still a bit cautious. Sister, what kind of job did you do? Is it that easy to make money abroad? There was obvious disbelief on her face. So I chuckled and took out the latest model of an iPhone from my bag and handed it to Ryan. For you, son. It's a gift from Mom. Ryan took the phone with a flattered look and his eyes were red with emotion. Judas was looking on eagerly. What about my gift? Since the gift for the son was a phone worth over 10,000 yuan, his gift as the father should be at least 20 or 30,000 yuan. Judas rubbed his hands together and smiled obsequiously. You? I did prepare a gift for you, but, I looked around with a look of disgust in my eyes. It's so disgusting. How can anyone live here? Judas immediately understood and grabbed a mop to clean up. When he had finished cleaning up all the garbage after a busy spell and was sweating profusely as he came to ask me for his gift, I took out a scarf with a smile and put it around Judas's neck. What's this? Judas was dumbfounded. This is a scarf I knitted for you with my own hands. It's not like those vulgar things. Husband, are you touched? Judas looked at the scorching summer sun outside the window and then at the thick woolen scarf around his neck, and his face darkened. For the next month, I lived in Judas's house. Every morning when I opened my eyes, I would order the people in Judas's house to do this and that. I wanted the house to be spotlessly clean, I wanted to eat big fish and meat, but I wouldn't give them any money when they asked me for it. I bossed them around every day, casually promised Judas a bright future, and then went on a shopping spree in the mall to create the illusion that I was rich. At first, Judas's mother was so angry at my domineering behavior that she was determined to get Judas to back her up. However, Judas was only thinking about the tens of millions of assets I had mentioned. After a month like this, it didn't take long for someone to have some evil ideas. As long as she's dead, all her money will be ours. I couldn't help but laugh as I watched the two of them whispering and plotting on my phone's surveillance camera. On the very first day when I stepped into Judas's house, I had secretly installed several hidden surveillance cameras. Now, their conversation was clearly heard by me without missing a single word. Delilah handed Judas a pack of medicine with a fierce look in her eyes. Are you going to kill her? Sensing Judas's panic, Delilah quickly reassured him. Don't worry. If taken for a long time, this medicine will only make her feel dizzy and have hallucinations. It won't kill her. By then, we'll send her to the mental hospital and be able to take over her money. Delilah softened her voice again. Do you want to see her bossing us around all the time at home? Mom is already so old, and she still has to be ordered around by her all day long. It makes my heart ache just looking at it, and the baby in my belly. Brother Judas, do you want our baby to be an illegitimate child without a name? Brother Judas? After all, she was the woman he loved. Looking at Delilah with tears streaming down her face, Judas immediately softened his heart. He hesitated for a moment before taking the medicine packet. Are you sure it won't kill her? After getting Delilah's affirmative answer, Judas couldn't help but show a hint of a smile when he thought of the wealth that was about to be within his grasp. That night, Judas knocked on my door. "Scarlett, I've made you some fresh bird's nest soup. You'd better eat it while it's hot." "Bird's nest soup?" I readily agreed and then immediately handed it to Judas's mother. As soon as the old woman heard it was something good, she immediately grabbed it and poured it into her mouth, afraid that I would eat it. In the following days, whenever Judas brought me something, I would hand it to Judas's mother without touching it. Half a month passed and I was fine, bouncing around as usual. However, Judas's mother suddenly went crazy in the middle of the night and barged into Delilah's room, scaring Delilah so much that she almost had a miscarriage. When Judas and I arrived, she was choking Delilah's neck and calling her a bitch. Looking at the crazy Judas's mother, Judas suddenly turned to look at me and demanded, "Where's the bird's nest soup I made for you? Didn't you eat it?" "Bird's nest soup?" I sighed as if helplessly. "Mom ate it all. You know how much Mom loves to eat expensive things. Although you made the bird's nest soup for me with your own hands, I was reluctant to let others eat it too. But after all, she's your mother. If she insisted on eating it, I couldn't do anything about it. After all, I've always been a filial person. Why are you suddenly asking about the bird's nest soup? Could it be that there was something wrong with it?" I rambled on by myself, completely ignoring Judas's increasingly ugly face. After learning that I had given all the bird's nest soup to Judas's mother, Judas was furious, but he couldn't tell the truth and could only grit his teeth and swallow this bitter pill. Coincidentally, Judas's mother did have some mental problems. She would go crazy and make a fuss every night. There was nothing Judas could do but send her to the mental hospital. After several failed attempts, Delilah quickly lost her patience. "This can't go on like this. She's spending all our money at this rate. If she spends all the money, we'll have nothing left. What should we do? Should we continue to drug her?" Judas was also worried. "Drugging her is too slow." Delilah shook her head. "I originally wanted to spare her life, but now it seems..." Delilah's eyes flickered, and a sinister smile suddenly appeared on the corner of her mouth. The next morning, Judas suddenly said he would take me hiking. Delilah's eyes flickered, and a sinister smile suddenly appeared on the corner of her mouth. "It's just the two of us." Looking at the plane tickets in his hand, I readily agreed. After getting off the plane, Judas led me around and finally brought me to a rather remote mountain range. On the top of the mountain, Judas waved the camera in his hand. "Scarlett, let me take a picture of you." "Sure." I readily agreed and posed as Judas asked. "Yes, that's right. Move back a little more. Raise your arm a little higher." As I moved little by little to the edge of the cliff, a flash of joy appeared in Judas's eyes. "Scarlett, let's take a group photo." He put down the camera and silently walked behind me. "Scarlett, goodbye." He suddenly spoke. The moment he reached out his hand, I quickly sidestepped. Behind me was a bottomless cliff. Ah! With a scream, Judas couldn't retract his force in time. His foot slipped, and he fell headfirst. I was quick-eyed and deft-handed. The moment he fell off the cliff, I grabbed one of his hands, preventing him from dying instantly. "Scarlett, save me!" Judas screamed in fear. At this moment, his feet were dangling in the air on the edge of the cliff, and below him was a bottomless abyss. All his hope was in the hand I was holding. I curled my lips slightly. In his pleading and terrified eyes, I slowly let go of his hand. Sensing his body falling, Judas immediately screamed, "You're killing me." "No," I said softly. "The camera behind me will record that you accidentally fell off the cliff and died." I slowly curved my lips into a smile and said softly, "Judas, goodbye." With that, I completely let go of his hand. When the news of Judas's death reached the country, Delilah immediately had a premature labor. In the hospital delivery room, she had a difficult labor and gave birth to a child. This is Judas's child. He has the right to inherit Judas's estate. Delilah was weak after giving birth, but the hatred in her eyes was not concealed at all. I smiled. "You say this is Judas's child. How can you prove it? Do you have a paternity test?" "His body has already been cremated." Or do you think Ryan will willingly give half of his own inheritance to someone else? Also, I took out a stack of receipts. This is all the money Judas spent on you during our marriage. It all belongs to our joint marital property. Now, I demand that you return my share of the joint marital property. With that, I got up and left the hospital. Delilah would have her own thorny path to tread in the future. After Judas's death, Judas's mother was trapped in the mental hospital. After hearing the news of her son's death, she soon passed away too. There was only Ryan left. I sent him to a boarding school and gave him a regular monthly allowance. As for how he was doing, it had nothing to do with me anyway. I would never slave away to support his education like I did in my past life. After dealing with the matters in Judas's family, I officially started my money-making plan. Before marrying Judas, I was originally a fashion designer. With my aesthetic design that was a decade ahead, I quickly earned my first pot of gold. There would be a second and a third pot in the future. The end.